Hello everyone and welcome to the On The Record podcast presented by the Western Weekender. On this podcast I am joined by special guests who have such great stories to tell about Penrith and the role they've played in our city. Today my special guest is Prue Car, the State Member for Londonderry and Deputy Leader of the New South Wales Labor Party. Prue's story is a great one, an Emu Plains kid who has gone on to reach huge highs in her chosen profession. Prue, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we always start with the question, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, don't hate me. Don't hate on me for this, but I actually was born in Brisbane.
Oh, wow, Queenslander.
I know, so I'm a Queenslander. My parents moved up there briefly where they had a baby. Mm-hmm. And then moved back to Western Sydney. So really, I was born in Queensland, but I was living in Emu Plains from the time I was a toddler, which is where all my childhood was spent. And where I went to school, and yeah.
As long as you don't cheer for the Maroons.
I definitely don't cheer for the Maroons, so don't worry about that.
So what was Emu Plains like in those days growing up?
I honestly feel like Emu was such an idyllic place to grow up. It was, your classic Aussie family life. My parents worked really hard to provide my sister and I with a really good childhood. We both went to Our Lady of the Way at Emu Plains, around the corner from where my parents still live, and it's still my childhood home. And they help me now pretty much every day with my own child, and we have such a strong connection to that community. I love Emu Plains. I think my parents, if they won the lottery, would just sort of probably go up and build up in the house they're living in. They'd never leave Emu Plains for love of money.
And what did they do?
Well, my parents were both bankies.
Yep.
They met while they were working in the bank. And my dad stayed at the ANZ Bank until his retirement. And my mum worked at Lowe's in Penrith while we were both going through school, my sister Courtney and I. So we often joke that she's pretty much outfitted everyone in Penrith with their school uniforms at Lowe's in the plaza. She started working there in the old plaza, if people can remember, before the great new plaza Westfield was built. So they, just worked really hard. They gave us a great life, and they were just brilliant role models, and they are to this day. So
growing up, was politics a big part of your fellow? Are they political people? Are they, was politics at the dinner table, or where did that really come from? Yeah,
not really. They, in full disclosure, they were always definitely Labor people. Like, I always had a sense that they were Labor supporters.
Which at that time, I guess, pretty common for this area as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah, true. And for people who had grown up in Western Sydney, both of them. My dad had migrated from India, actually, when he was a teenager, but spent most of his life in Western Sydney. So, yeah, that's true. Very common in those times. But really, I sort of... my interest sparked when I was about 15, which does sound a bit unusual, but I was in Year 9 at school at Carroll and Chisholm. And I said to my mum, I'm really interested in politics. I was watching Meet the Press on a Sunday, which I think was on Channel 10 at the time, and I was screaming at the TV during the federal election, and my mum said, you can join the Labor Party, and for a 15-year-old girl, as if you know that.
Yeah.
So they definitely encouraged me. It wasn't sort of forced on me, but definitely there was a strong sense of encouragement.
And you say you went to Caroline Chisholm, where you did become school captain, so I'm guessing you were a pretty good student?
I loved school. That school was... I had such a beautiful experience there. I saw Glenmore Park completely change in my time. I remember when I first started there, it was Regentville. There were no houses. I think the school was next to, pretty much farmland. And then in my time there, in the sort of mid-90s to 2000, it just completely exploded. Yeah, so I was in the first group, as it would have it, to go from Year 10 to then Year 11 to Year 12, because people might remember that both DOMS and Chisholm were 7 to 10 schools, and then they went 7 to 12, yep.
And so, subjects at school, was there particular, was politics, obviously at that point, has become a big focus for you?
Yeah, I loved English and all the humanities subjects. Yeah. My English teacher and I were very close, and she really encouraged me. In fact, there was a day that when I first joined the Labor Party that Kim Beazley was coming to Werrington, to Harold Court, to launch the campaign of the then failed Labor candidate for Lindsay at the time. And I called my English teacher and I said, oh, look, this is happening. And she said, take the day off school. So they were very encouraging of me. But I really, really enjoyed my time at that school. Fantastic. The principal at the time, Anne Wenham, was really, it was a really great experience and a really great group of girls.
And I guess the good thing about that is, say, a good group of girls in that school years, it's really luck of the draw, isn't it? Like sometimes you can have a school year that just stays together and remains friends, and other times it's all over, as soon as year 12 ends. But it sounds like you've had a pretty close bond there with that school and students there.
Yeah, that's true. And I think just generally, like, people know that Penrith feels like just a big, small town anyway. So, like, we sort of all keep in contact online, and it's nice to see everyone sort of growing up and having their own families and living their lives. Many of us still live in this community where we're now raising our own kids.
Now, there was a big, I guess, it's almost less now, but particularly around that time, there was very much a, hey, I finished school, I'm leaving Penrith. There was a lot of people kind of felt that. Did you have that feeling, or you always wanted to be around here?
Yeah, I definitely always wanted to be around here. And I think, like, it's sort of proven to be that, like, why would you? I'm biased because now part of my job is to spruik this area, but, like, why would you? Like, especially if you want to raise a young family, like this area just keeps getting better and better. Like, I never had a sense that I wanted to leave this area. Like, I always lived here, and I'm really proud that my own family is being raised in the Penrith area.
So you leave school. At this point, you're a member of the Labor Party.
Yeah.
At that point, are you, well, hey, this is what I want to do for a living, or is it still just a political interest? Where did the this is what I'm following career-wise come in? Yeah,
like I think I was sort of involved in Young Labor, and like people obviously, you can join the Labor Party or the Liberal Party or whatever in the country, you can join the Nats, and they all have these youth wings, and I was really involved in Young Labor, and I knew that it was like a lot of like-minded people that shared a lot of my views. I probably at that stage didn't think that I would do it for a career. I actually really wanted to go into journalism because, like, I loved English. I loved writing. I thought that would be. I loved public speaking. I thought that would make sense. And sort of what happened was I started my uni degree, and I became more and more involved in politics. And I sort of realised, wow, like maybe I can actually make a career out of this. I really thought that if I worked hard enough, maybe I could make a difference in the world via politics. And
let me ask first, the people obviously generally inspire, who were you particularly inspired by at that stage?
Yeah.
I guess generally someone's got someone that made them go, yeah, that's who I'm listening to, that's who I want to be like, or that makes me want to follow that direction.
Yeah, look, to be honest, probably at that stage, I don't think there was like one person. Like, I didn't want to be like Paul Keating or Gough Whitlam or, Bob Carr or someone like that. Like, I felt like I could make a difference in my own community and probably to the state and the country. But, like, honestly, people ask me this question all the time, but I don't feel like there was like one person that I wanted to emulate. Like, you hear some people talk about people from both sides, but not really for me, to be honest. Like, I just sort of felt really drawn to the cause on issues, if you like.
Yep. And you ultimately end up following a reasonably typical path for some, which is all levels of government, in terms of local and then state. How did your first tilt for council come about?
Yeah, well, I was really keen to run for council. I had a couple of jobs in politics at that stage. I was really close to the previous Labor member for Lindsay, David Bradbury, and he suggested that I put my hand up for the Labor Party pre-selection for Penrith Council, and I did that, and I was pre-selected to run for the South Ward, and then it's a really tricky spot for us, traditionally, that sort of second spot in South Ward, and I ended up getting elected and in 2008. And I was the very last councillor to get elected at that election. So it was I just sort of got in the skin of my teeth. So it was a very interesting experience for someone that had spent, a lot of their previous years campaigning for other people to be involved. And then I loved being on council. I thought it was really, really fun.
Council's interesting because there's a lot of people who argue, well, we shouldn't have, party politics in council or whatnot. But the reality is that, that can be a really great connection to have at other levels of government if you're in a certain party at council. But you really do get to deal with real, true on the ground issues at councils. That must have been a good time and a good footing for what was to come in the future too.
I think in reality, there's a reason why there's so many people in state and federal parliaments who have been in local government, because it does give you a good training ground. But I have to say, I think Penrith does a good job generally, and all of us do it. Like, people on the other side of, like, we're not that party political on the council.
Yeah.
So while it does give you a good, it throws you in the deep end in terms of dealing with people's issues, responding to, people that you're supposed to represent, learning how to, stay accountable to people, facing up to the electorate, trying to navigate the insane levels of bureaucracy to get what you think is a simple thing fixed.
Yeah.
That is a really good training. But it's not that party political on Penrith, and I think that also was a really good lesson to take, to be honest. To like, sometimes you have to work with everyone across the spectrum.
You mentioned David Bradbury there, someone obviously who you worked with pretty extensively. Many people would say probably one of our best federal members in Lindsay. What did you learn from him?
Yeah, I learned a very strong work ethic from Dave. Like, I don't think would have had a free day, like, as his time as a federal member. Like, he was constantly working for the community. He would be very insistent on, returning everyone's call, making sure he's constantly in the media advocating for issues. He definitely gave me that sense, you really have to earn the privilege of representing the community.
Now, you stay on council until 2016, but we'll go a year earlier to 2015 in the state election, where you win the seat of Londonderry. Just before that, how does the nomination process come about? So were you at any point, earmarked as, hey, Prue's the one for years down the track, or did you drive for that? What's the process involved in that?
Yeah, well, I had previously run for the seat of Mulgoa in 2011, and that's when Labor lost government, and it was just an absolute disaster. I'm pretty sure I've tried to block this from my memory, but I think it was a 27% swing against us in that seat. So
pretty awful time to come into the fold.
Learning experience, So I had decided that I wanted to run again, and there was a redistribution of boundaries, and some of the suburbs that were in Mulgoa were redistributed to Londonderry, and so I was keen to run for that seat. And it was a lot of those suburbs were ones that I represented on council in my ward. So I had gone to the Labor Party and said, I'm keen to nominate for this seat. And then there's a pre-selection process. If other people nominate, then pre-selectors vote for who the best candidate they think is. And in the end, I was the only nomination for that. So I was pre-selected a long time out before 2015. There was about, I think we worked out it was almost 500 days or something, because we had to win the seat back from the Liberals who had it. The member was retiring, Bart Bassett, but it was the government had held the seat. So that's how it was just a very, very long campaign to win.
Which obviously is not always possible to have a 500-day campaign, but I guess in that instance proves that sometimes that is the way it needs to be. Sometimes 5 weeks beforehand a nominee pops up, a candidate pops up, they just don't have the time to really entrench themselves in the community. I
am the biggest fan for this, and I think it just really gave me the best foundation. There is literally no better way than literally knocking on as many people's doors. And in the end, I would have attempted to get to every house in my electorate at least once. And there was a lot of phoning. And to be honest, if you are elected, like I was so blessed to have been, when you are actually having to make decisions, if you're in Parliament or represent people, if you have had 500 days of speaking to people one-on-one, that totally changes you. It completely changed me as a person and as a professional in my job.
Now, you mentioned just then knocking on doors.
Yeah.
So back in, this is a fairly long time ago now, I had the bright idea that I wanted to go door knocking with one of our local MPs, and that was Karen Palazzano, the state member at the time. And I said,
That is going back.
I said, yes, it certainly is. And I said, well, I'll go out with you for a day of door knocking. And at the end of that day, I don't know how you would do this every day. I honestly just don't know how between door slamming and legitimately then the opposite as well, which is people who are in desperate need of assistance for something and they see you there and they think you could be the person to help me. But how do you do that? How do you do that every day?
I am not just saying this, but I honestly really enjoy it. And I think genuinely people are amazing and lovely, right? Mm-hmm. People don't expect you to do it.
But the truth is, you could be knocking on the president of the Scott Morrison fan club. Like
you
don't know who you.
And I have many times knocked on a door of someone who absolutely hates the Labor Party, right? And that's the way it goes. And that's one of the amazing things about this country is that you can have a view and you can express it to a politician, and that's your democratic right. It's actually anyway. I really enjoy it. I think it is there's no better way. A lot of people do phoning. I do a little bit of that too. But looking in the whites of someone's eyes and getting a sense of where people are at and what they need. At the end of the day, that's the old politics that people lament that we don't have anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So 2015, Coalition retains government, but you win the seat of Londonderry. So, is it mixed feelings that night, or is it relief that you've won the seat primarily?
Yeah, it's just a real big sense of responsibility, I suppose, that night, and a real privilege. Yes, they did win government, and that was I remember at the time thinking this is going to be interesting because I need to represent my community. My party's not in government. It's a sort of peculiar set of things to work with, but very, very grateful to be elected. Very, very grateful.
How difficult is that then? I mean, you're still in that position now. That may well change in 12 months' time, but how difficult is it to be in opposition in general, but you're holding the seat and you're their representative locally? Yeah,
look, it can be difficult because governments can play politics, of course, but at the same time you can actually put pressure on a government to get a solution for your community. And there's been plenty of examples, I think, where I've been able to work with a community to get a good outcome from opposition.
And, well, to that point, there's, I guess, nothing that you won't stand up for and do. You've been in I don't know how many photos with us at the Western Weekender and radio interviews and everything else. So I guess one of the most important things is to stay vocal and not just say, well, there's nothing much I can do from opposition.
I think the sort of community I represent is one where people expect me to fight for things that matter to them. And that's I just try to keep on top of everything, and I think that people deserve that at the end of the day. And if they don't think I've done that, well, then they'll kick me out, and that's the way it goes.
In 2019, of course, you won the seat again, but again the coalition is elected. There was probably a feeling that you were a better chance, Labor were a better chance in 2019 than 2015. So was that more disappointing in 2019 to know that then there's 4 more long years to go in opposition?
As a rule, politicians don't like being in opposition, right? Because you want to be able to deliver for the community that you represent. So I suppose, it is disappointing, but the voters very rarely get that wrong. And, I think we just generally, we have to seriously learn lessons. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure that we're well on the way to learning some of the lessons from the previous elections. And then hopefully in 2023 we can really make a good go of it.
In the meantime, of course, you rise up through the shadow ministry, become the shadow education minister, now the deputy leader. Now the deputy leadership comes about when Chris Minns obviously takes over as leader. How difficult was that period? Any leadership change is obviously really, really difficult, and you had to make a tough personal call around that time.
Yeah, it's not nice, right? And it plays out in the media, which is pretty unfortunate. But at the end of the day, I really believed that Chris was a better shot at winning government, and I want to be able to represent my community in government so we can get results. And to me, even though it's a difficult period, that was somewhat of an easy decision, and Chris and I have been able to work really well together, I think, and he's really committed to giving Western Sydney a good voice. And we're out there working hard.
Much of this last term now has been dominated by the pandemic. I'm interested in how difficult that was from the opposition standpoint, because there were times when, hey, we just need to be, totally bipartisan here. We need to, all we're doing is tackling the pandemic. Let's support the government. But there must have been, even early on, frustrating days where you're like, that's not, I think everyone, no matter if you think the government has handled things well or not, has gone, this particular restriction sounds stupid, or this rule is, doesn't make sense. So how was it finding the balance there that it didn't just come across that we're just criticising the government, who are in probably the most difficult situation in a few decades? Yeah,
look, I think that actually wasn't an easy decision for Chris and I to take in terms of... No, sorry. It was easy in that that's the right thing to do, what we chose to do, but there was some pushback in terms of, shouldn't Labor always be criticising the Liberals in government? Well, really... when you step back, we need to put the community's interests first, and we certainly didn't think that harping on political point scoring when we just have to get through a genuine crisis is not going to help anyone. So it was sort of I think a point at which I personally think Chris really did show some serious leadership. And, if he's putting himself forward to the people of New South Wales to be the alternate Premier, he has to show that sort of leadership. So that was, I think, a chance to do that. There were definitely some really trying times, though, in that, like in the Delta lockdown, particularly for some of the communities I represent, and the way the restrictions were different in certain areas and all sorts of things. And I think that, where we needed to advocate for our communities, we did that. But that's really not a time for politics, and that really came back from the community. They didn't want us to do that, I don't think.
But still, obviously, really difficult times. I think that particularly that second lockdown that you refer to was when there was just significant split in opinions, and the initial lockdown that was not a lockdown. And then you're right, like literally one street on the side of the Northern Road is in a completely different set of restrictions to the other. So a really difficult time. Yes. We'll talk about 2023 in a moment, but you, of course, from a personal perspective, you have a son, 8-year-old son. How does that juggle happen? Because you're obviously in a much more demanding position now, the most demanding you've been in so far. How is the juggle with him?
Well, I think any sort of working parent, working mum or working dad knows, like, it's just a daily juggle. Like, every day is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And, we manage. Like, he's an awesome kid. My parents are amazing, like, literally lifesavers. Like many people, like when I go and speak to parents outside schools, a lot of the time it's grandparents picking up from school. Yeah. We do that. My partner has a couple of kids and he also helps in an amazing way, really supportive. We help each other. Like, it's just, you got to do what you got to do. And Max is pretty good at sort of, kids are really resilient and they sort of roll with the punches a little bit. Mum's job is a bit weird.
Does he understand what you do?
Well, he was 2 when I was elected, so to him it's sort of normal, but he does understand what I do because when we go to Woolworths, a lot of people will stop and ask questions of me. But yeah, I think it's important for him to know why I'm doing it as well. So yeah, we have a lot of chats about politics. Don't know if I'd ever recommend him going into it, but yeah, it's just a juggle like everyone else.
So 2023, obviously just around the corner. It feels like it has come around pretty quick. I think that if you asked most people today, they would say that Chris Minns may well be the Premier and you may well be the Deputy Premier at this time.
I don't know about that. Like,
this time next year. I don't know if you can consider yourself the favourites or whatnot, but I know everyone loves to be the underdog in those situations. But you must feel somewhat confident. You must feel that there is a potential change in the air. It does have that feeling, that almost... not as dramatic as 2011 the other way, but it certainly feels like there is a shift.
Yeah, look, I think the government in New South Wales have been in for a long time. They will be asking to be a very long-term government if they win in 2023. And what I am confident about is that Chris and the team will be able to present a real alternate vision, and I think that we really will be competitive. We do have to win a lot of seats, but I think that we really will. It'll be a competition, a real competition. And as always, Penrith and the surrounding areas will be the centre of attention.
What do you think will be the key points? I mean, if you fast forward to then, I mean, we keep saying this will be out of, we'll be back into normality, but we may well be, we may not be.
Yeah.
What do you think will be the key issues? Or the pandemic's potentially behind us, but the ramifications of lockdowns are going to be long term.
Yeah, look, I think definitely at a state level, yes, the ramification of the lockdowns and its impact on small business and, in our area in particular, like micro and small businesses are just everywhere. Like, in suburbs like I represent, like areas like Jordan Springs, there's pretty much, like it's full of people that, employ themselves or employ one or two people. So that's a huge thing, and the economic hit that they've taken. And I think in Western Sydney at large, some of the biggest areas will be around how we're dealing with growth, whether it's investment in health, investment in schools where they're needed, road upgrades, things like that. And then, beyond those issues, we really need to be looking at what this sort of fourth term coalition government potentially has on the cards, We've got a Premier who has gone out there and said that he's, in favour of an increase of the GST. They're out there arguing for replacement of stamp duty with land tax. That will really hurt people in our community. There's a lot of big issues at play. Absolutely.
Can we circle back just a few myth-busting questions potentially, or political myth-busting questions? One of the biggest things that I think people say about politicians is, well, where were they for the last 4 years, 3 years, whatever it may be? They've disappeared, whatever. And I reckon that's, if I was a politician, I would be most offended by that constant remark, because I think if I would challenge them to put their diary against your diary or anyone's diary and see what they do day to day. Can you just run us through, like, what is an average day in terms of when it starts, when it finishes, and it really doesn't finish?
I don't want to sound trite, but there's no such thing as an average day. But so for instance, I will usually, I suppose in my role as deputy or as shadow minister, I'll get a phone call usually from one of the media advisors at 5:30 usually in the morning if there's an issue that they want me to comment on radio. So that happened this morning to do with ventilation in public schools and the government's lack of investment in that. And then say, I might have a day in the electorate where I'm, going in, for instance, I'm opening something at Marsden Park today, a new big transport hub. I'm going over to Castlereagh to help a community group access a donation from a local company, going to a school. I might do in normal non-COVID times, I might go and do a listing post somewhere at a shopping centre where I meet people and they raise issues with me. I sometimes do them early in the morning as well. I might go to a function at night, and somewhere in between there I might pop into my office in St Mary's, sign some letters, speak to some constituents, have some meetings. So it's pretty full on. And then on the weekends, usually I'm doing things like, shopping centre stores, listening posts, I call them, where people would have seen me through the years, they can come up to me and raise issues, and then we follow up on those issues and make sure that we're fixing where we can the concerns that people have.
Does it grind on you when people say that? When people say, "Hey, where have you been for the last 4 years?" Or "I never heard of this person."
Yeah, I don't know if it so much grinds on me, because it's pretty much impossible to get to everyone. But so I suppose it's totally people's democratic right to say, "I don't know you and I never heard of you," but that just means that I've got to work a little bit harder and get to know that person.
I often say, well, it's kind of on them as well. In all honesty, I mean, you could read your local newspapers, listen to how much you engage.
Read the Western Weekender.
Read the Western Weekender. That's up to you. What about social media? You use social media a lot for your to deal with constituents, to deal with other issues. What about the nasty side of social media? Is that something that you deal with, particularly as a woman in politics?
Yeah, a little bit, but at the same time, it's just another vehicle by which people feel like they can raise concerns, sometimes vent. People especially in the lockdown, I think were really, really frustrated. So I think it's not as bad as people might expect.
Mm-hmm.
I think genuinely the feedback really on social media is people just reaching out. And even in my time, like I'm coming up to 7 years, I've seen that completely change. Like when I was first elected, the way people would contact you is you'd see them on the street or they'd call the office or email or whatever. And honestly now it's Facebook. And when you think about it, like how do you go and find something out? You'll go on your phone and look up Instagram or Facebook or whatever, which apparently my 8-year-old son says Facebook and Instagram for old people. But
Have you got a TikTok account?
I actually do have a TikTok, but I haven't used it yet. Okay. So because I don't know about politicians on TikTok, but I'm supposed to be on it. But yeah, that's how people interact with you. So like honestly, it's so much of what we do is responding to people who raise issues on social media. And like I would just say to anyone, like if you have something you think needs fixing or you want to give your opinion, like just get onto any politician. And I'm sure like anyone, like any, Stuart Ayres, everyone would say that.
I think, and to a lesser extent at council level, I always tell people councillors have their mobile phone, like their direct mobile phone numbers on the Penrith Council website. Like when people say that they can't access politicians, they're actually a lot more accessible. Their local representatives are a lot more accessible than they think. What about the fact that obviously you're in opposition and your job is to oppose the the government in general? I'm a firm believer that no political party could possibly get it right all of the time. No. What about the days where you go, well, actually, I think it was a pretty good announcement? Like, I mean, how does that unfold in terms of you're not really going to go out there and say that? I mean, that's not something that happens.
Yeah.
Are there days when you go, here's some talking points and, gee, I don't really agree with that? Like, how do you balance that side of things?
Yeah. Do you know, people would be surprised that the vast majority of even the bills that come to Parliament, we would sort of all have, not all of us, but some major parties would have similar views on, right? So, like, we're not always at each other's throat. Like, what people see on the news and stuff is just, like, snippets, and it's not like that all the time. There are some things that the government does announce that, like, say, in my portfolio of education, where I will go, I'm not going to criticise that because I don't think it's worth criticising. Like, and, like, if there's one thing I know, it's that people hate that. They hate it, and fair enough. Like, if it doesn't make sense to criticise it, like, why are you harping on negative? People hate that. Like, the opposition is there to hold the government to account and present an alternative, absolutely, and that's, like, part of a robust democracy. But, like, just criticising for the sake of criticising doesn't do anyone any good, and it certainly doesn't help the standing of my profession in the public eye. And
I guess away from state, federal Labor faces that challenge at the moment in that to be honest, the easy way is probably just to go anti-Scott Morrison all the way through, because that's playing pretty well at the moment, to be honest. And he's probably doing himself, he's putting himself in that position. But it's kind of got to go, well, how personal do you go, before it's just too negative?
Yes, and I think we know that people just don't like that, like they want a real contest of what the options are in terms of policy. And, fill your boots, if you think that the Labor or the Liberal policy is going to be bad for Australia, in our case the state, like, go your hardest. But I think when it gets a bit personal, people hate that stuff.
Do you think things have changed in regards to the classic political, like, we can go kissing babies or whatever else, but, the other night I was watching, Dominic Perrottet supposedly making sandwiches for his children and whatnot. Now, I think we could accept and know and be quite happy to know that he probably doesn't do that every morning. He's probably at Parliament or his office by 6 o'clock in the morning. Do you think that the public still buys that? Is that still the messaging that, or is it too old school and that people are awake up to that now?
Yeah, I think people know that, like, every family is trying to juggle everything, and then, like, not mum and dad are at, like, not every family's nuclear like that either. They're at home making, Vegemite sandwiches for all their kids in the morning. Like, I think that people, because of social media and how much media people consume all the time, are much smarter than a lot of people in politics give them credit for. So I think we just have to treat people, with intelligently, like, with the respect that they deserve.
And what about final myth-busting thing is that all politicians lie, and this constant... But I think if you went back through most governments fulfill at least the majority, if not have attempted to fill the majority of commitments. Now, not always the case, and that's your job to absolutely point out. But often there's circumstances at play here. It is not a case of, do you ever believe that there is an intentional, we are going to say this and never deliver it? Whether you're in opposition or government.
Yeah, look, I think there are some cases where the government commits to things and makes out like it's announcing it, but they're only announcing, say, planning money or something like that.
And people probably don't understand that side of it.
Yeah, so when they commit to, say, a high school somewhere and people buy lots of land because they think there's going to be a high school and then there's only planning money and the construction is 5 to 10 years away, that's, in my mind, that is deceitful, right? But I don't think it's true to say all politicians lie, but I tell you what, there's been plenty of people, and unfortunately on both sides, that have sort of helped people to believe that. So it's sort of really incumbent on, I think, the decent and good ones, of which there actually are many on all sides, to just be good and hardworking and prove that most of us have great intentions, maybe different ways to get there. But, we're just working hard trying to get a good result for the community.
For sure. Final question, I guess. What about your future? Where do you believe you want to be? And I know the safe answer is to say, hey, I just want to be the Deputy Premier of New South Wales next March, but
I do.
You obviously must have aspirations beyond that as well, potentially. Where does your future, do you feel, lie?
Yeah, look, I have a marginal seat. It's just one of those seats where I have to fight at every election. So first and foremost is getting re-elected. And I know people think I'm going to say that, but that's true. I just don't have one of those seats that's either going to be a safe Labor or a safe Liberal seat. So work really hard, as always, to get re-elected and then see, if I'll serve however the Labor Party sort of asks me in opposition or in government. It's a massive honour to be Deputy Leader. If I'm Deputy Premier, what an honour that is. To get, that's a great honour for me. Just get re-elected and see where it takes me.
You are in a career where, I guess, ego is not the right word, but you're in a career where there is significant progression around you. So, Premier one day, is that in your...
Well, let's see. Let's see.
Can't rule it out, eh?
I can't rule it out.
No one should ever rule that out, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I said it was the final question, but one more. If there is someone listening, a younger person who like you at 15 is, I want to get involved in politics, what would be your recommendation these days in terms of how to follow that pursuit?
Get onto social media. Find someone that you identify with. So, if you think you're Labor or Liberal, find someone, particularly in your local area, that you think sort of reflects how you see the world. Contact them and just go, hey, I want to get involved, and I will guarantee that one of us will get back to you. And there's people on all sides of politics that will mentor you, get involved in your future. We need more normal young people in politics. So get involved. It actually is a really great way to make a difference.
Awesome. Well, Prue, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
you. We know how passionate you are about this community, and normally we speak to people about their very long life in Penrith. You've still got so much more to give to Penrith, but thank you very much and all the best in 2023.
Thank you.
And I hope you enjoyed our chat with Prue. A reminder that On The Record is released every Monday. Just search Western Weekender wherever you listen to podcasts and hit the subscribe button. On The Record is produced by the Western Weekender and recorded at the studios of My 88. Check out westernweekender.com.au and we'll see you next time.
Stay informed, up to date and entertained thanks to Para News. Para News is Parramatta's leading local newspaper, delivering the best content from on-the-ground journalists and providing businesses with direct access to potential customers. News, sport, entertainment, auto, crosswords and so much more. Para News really is the heartbeat of Parramatta. Out every Tuesday. Get your copy at selected pickup spots across the region or check out paranews.com.au. Para News, your local news leader.